So it's always lovely to get applause right before we actually do anything. A bit of introduction. So I'm Julie McCoy. I am a principal technical specialist with Microsoft. That means that I work with our sales teams to be the technical representation of our products. So I talk about all the things we're going to talk about. So especially Microsoft Purview, especially things like data classification, things that normally apply even if you don't have AI, but absolutely apply when we're talking about the age of AI. And I'll be presenting the first half of this presentation, after which I'll turn it over to Matt Dell.
Nice to meet you guys. My name is Matt Dell. I'm also a compliance technical specialist. I've been at Microsoft for about 2.5 years, but Julie and I are on the same team. We cover the same content. We just divide and conquer because there's a lot of accounts that Microsoft supports. So today we're just here to talk to you about the exciting announcements that came out of Ignite, but also just to recap what Purview is and kind of where it's been, where it is today, and then what just recently was announced last month.
So, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end, but broadly, here's what we're going to be talking about. So if we say, what is Microsoft Purview? So Matt and I get this kind of question all the time. I actually started before we had Purview, so almost 5 years ago. So back then, we just had a lot of security products, and we had a lot of, we just call them compliance products. And we've taken all these disparate products and we put them either into Defender, which is what our security counterparts typically talk about, or Purview, which is what people like me, Matt and myself talk about. And these days, to kind of help customers figure out what that means, compliance means a lot of different things, especially those of you who come from the financial industry. If I say compliance, you might not be thinking of technology. But if I say data security, you probably know what I mean. If I say regulatory information, making sure you're compliant with those rules, you know what I mean. So we're going to talk a bit about how we can take some of these tools into the AI and Copilot space. We'll actually give you a slideshow demo of what we can do with some of the new things that we announced at Ignite, some of which are GA, some of which are in preview. And we'll talk a bit about some of the announcements at the end that came out at Ignite in addition to things. So we came up with Purview as a branding exercise for a bunch of, like I said, disparate tools that all work together in a single Purview console. And this is where we're rolling a lot of our Copilot and AI controls. So we'll talk later on about data security posture management for AI, which is formerly known as AI Hub, where we can view and control not just Microsoft AI tools, but third-party AI tools and get visibility into the usage of those tools in your environment. But we created all these things along the way because these are the concerns that customers are coming to us with. So I'm worried about information leaking. And we all think of the malicious activities. So an employee says, I hate this place. I'm going to walk out of here with all my company proprietary information and go work for a competitor. But it can also be employees just trying to do the right thing. Hey, I want to pull a weekend to finish this report. I'm going away for the holidays to see the family. I'm going to log onto my mom's computer and try to do some stuff. We may not want people always accessing proprietary information that they have access to. We might put some limits around it. And we can talk about controls we have there. We also say, since we announced Copilot last year before last, it feels like it's been forever.
I guess it was last year.
I think it was technically last year. We've had a lot of customers say, wow, that sounds really amazing. My employees will be more productive. And then they say, wait a minute, there's a lot of gaps I have here. I don't have controls over my sensitive information. So I'm not going to deploy Copilot. And some customers will say, that's fine, I'll wait. And other customers will say, but no, I really want those productivity gains now. What do I need to do to make my data secure, but also allow my employees to be more productive with it? And then lastly, and we're getting closer to that 2027 date, there is a lot of changes regulation-wise. So again, I've been in this space for over 5 years, 9 years if I count a previous employer. And I remember back when everyone said GDPR is coming. You need to be ready. That is a privacy regulation, and the Europeans are going to find the heck out of you if you're out of compliance. And we all thought that that would drive the adoption of the tooling and the controls, the regulatory frameworks to put in place to protect information. And some companies did that. Some companies said, well, I just got fined a couple $1 million, but that's okay because I make 100 times that a year. And then we've also seen companies say, well, that's a European regulation. I don't need to worry about that in the US. But then in the US, we started seeing states adopt their own regulatory frameworks. We do not have a strong federal approach to data security and privacy that California does, Virginia does, Iowa does. Every state is coming up with their own standards and they model themselves on each other, but they do vary. So we had customers say, I don't know what I need to do to be legally compliant in all the states and countries and regions that I work in. So we wanted to create something that could make it easy for our customers to address all of these needs. I'm worried about data leakage. I'm not sure what to do for Gen AI, and I'm not sure about the regulatory landscape that we're entering into. So behold, Microsoft Purview. This is a story that has evolved as we've updated our solutions. And I have to say, we are not sitting still. We have added so many capabilities in response to customer demand. I said I worked with Purview before it was called Purview. I remember talking about these individual solutions, and every year we're adding new capabilities based on customer feedback. We want things that will work for our customers, but not just one customer here and there, but something that will work programmatically for all of our customers. So the way we can organize things is in these three categories: data security, data governance, and data compliance, which kind of map to what I mentioned earlier. So data security, let's say that's controls on who and under what circumstances you can access content. So a simple example, don't allow people to send credit card numbers externally through email, or don't allow them to send employee personal information outside the company through email. But there might be exceptions. What if the HR team is working with a recruiting firm? Well, maybe we can allow that sometimes. Do we want to allow them to access it on a company device only, or on any device, or on a mobile device? Does the device have to be registered, etc.? Do we put controls on the files so that if somehow the file leaves the control of your environment, you can still prevent the wrong people from opening it up? When we turn to data governance, we actually have two slightly different tracks. So the things that Matt and I talk about very often are things like data retention. I have a bunch of emails. I have a bunch of stuff in SharePoint. I have a bunch of stuff in OneDrive. Do I need all this stuff? The more stuff you have, the more stuff you have to protect. So if you can say, I don't need to keep emails older than 10 years, unless maybe they have this content in them, or I have documents that no one has accessed in 5 years, do I really need to keep those around? You can create policies to automatically delete them or automatically keep them in place, not allowing them to be deleted until after a certain period. And you can also create labels that your employees or automatically can be added to things to say, keep this for this long, and after that, do something. Okay.
It's okay.
We'll figure it out, Jay. So the other thing that we talk about very often in data governance gets into what we now call Purview Unified Governance. If you ever heard of something called Azure Purview, that's what we essentially now call Purview Unified Governance. And that gets into structured data. So when customers say, I need a map of my entire estate, including my databases, my blob storage, I've got some Amazon S3, I've got a bunch of other third-party tools, some of which are on servers, some of which might be in the cloud. I need to know where all the sensitive information is, and it can't just be M365. We do that with Purview Unified Governance. And with data compliance, that's where we say there are times you need to do some research. So we might need to audit the activities of people, how they were accessing content. Did they violate a data loss prevention rule? Did they create a new document and copy and paste some sensitive information in and then print it off? We can also do eDiscovery. So we have eDiscovery tools that work well on their own, but also have APIs allowing third-party eDiscovery products to connect with them. And one advantage of our eDiscovery solutions is that we keep things in place. We don't move them to another location, creating another copy and another place that you have to lock things down. Now, across all of this, we've got the data map, connectors, classification, labels, audit, visibility, all this stuff. I'm not going to drain all of them. I'll just say, I mentioned data map earlier. Where's my stuff? I want to know, where's my company proprietary information? Where's my credit card information? Where's all the stuff I care about? And who owns it? Because now I can go to the people who own that data and the people who use that data and say, is that the best place for it? How is it that you're interacting with this information? And can we put some controls on that will protect it, that allow you to do your job? The connectors, so I talk at least a lot about Purview in an M365 context, but we have these data connectors that can ingest content from third-party solutions. We also have APIs that can allow third-party tools to access telemetry, information about what people are doing in your environment from Purview. So we're very friendly with third parties. You don't have to be 100% all Microsoft and never mind the rest. Putting some of the products in here, I mentioned BLP earlier. I mentioned eDiscovery and Audit. I mentioned the data catalog, which is part of the Purview United Governance now. Insider risk management is kind of a new category of tool. And the way I like to describe it is, we all know what data loss prevention is, right? I'm going to create a rule that says, if you do something with this, an action occurs. It might be somebody gets a notification. It might be I block that action. It might be I put up a little warning, hey, you're handling sensitive information. Be careful how you share that in Teams, etc. But insider risk management says, let's take all of that information and put it into context. So for example, we have this idea of a triggering event. Julie is allowed to access sensitive information day in and day out. It's her job. She works in finance, she works in HR, she's handling all the sensitive information, and we've got rules in place. But if that person puts in their resignation, or if they get put on a performance improvement plan, or if they engage in some other kind of activity that makes us a little concerned, we might say, let's look at what they were doing for the past 2 months and what they're going to do for the next month or so. Because are they slowly leaking information out under the threshold of the rules that we put in place? Is there a spike in activity? Were they a problem 2 months ago and we had some kind of interaction and said, don't do that, and now they're becoming a problem again? That's what insider risk management does for us. And it, just to elaborate on it a little bit, it allows us to anonymize. So I don't necessarily, as an analyst, know, am I investigating the CEO, or my water cooler best friend, or just some random person in the organization. I also like to talk about communication compliance because in particular with Copilot, this is where we can put some controls in place. So a simple way to think about Copilot for M365 is I've got a friend in Teams. And when I interact with Copilot, those are essentially Teams chats. And I can monitor the content of those chats, where there's some other things we can do as well. But I can say, oh, did this person start asking a bunch of really specific questions about company proprietary information? What are the salaries of all the people in the company? What's the latest secret projects? Or I heard this phrase, can you tell me everything about Project Obsidian? Communication compliance is the tool we would normally use to supervise email and Teams communications between people. We can also do that between a person and Copilot. And we can bring those up as things to review. Is it normal? Is it a little concerning? And we can escalate that for investigation if we need to. Last but not least, from this picture here, Compliance Manager. Just a quick show of hands for those of you in the room. How many of you are responsible for helping to attest, does the company comply with Regulation X? Yeah, right. Something comes over and says, are you compliant with NIST, any of the NISTs? Are you compliant with CMMC? Are you compliant with GDPR? It's nice to have a checklist. Here are the things that I should do. I'm doing it. I choose not to do it. Most customers I work with have spreadsheets to do this in, and some of them get very elaborate with crazy formulas that create red flags and green flags. Well, what we did with Compliance Manager is we said, one, we can see some of the controls that you put in place in M365 directly. We can also provide a place for you to simply attest. Here's my sensitive information handling program. Here's a link, or here's a copy of the handbook, and I implemented it on September 30th, 2024. It becomes your book of record as well as your checklist, and becomes a console for those of you who are tasked with that job. You don't have to be high-level administrators to look into these things. You can have your own space to work in to say, here's a template of any of those regulations. I'm going to create an assessment of whichever ones I care about, and that's going to be my workbook. And today I can say we're 60% compliant, and we're going to do these things. And 6 months later, I can report to senior leadership, we're now 70% compliant. It's a record-keeping tool as well as just a simple checklist. There we go. So how does this map out to some of our solutions? So if you've ever dealt with a Microsoft sales team, you probably know that there are some people you talk to about M365. Some people you talk about MIBP, which let's just call that all the Azure data stuff. Yeah.
Stay close.
Yes. Thank you. Nowadays, there are separate people you talk about with Copilot. And then you might talk to somebody else about what can Microsoft do to secure your third-party data clouds. So whether that's Google, AWS, Dropbox, anything else. We do a lot of those integrations. So this just helps us to understand where do these things fall into. The point is we can do data security, data governance, and data compliance across all of these solutions, including, I like to mention, the third-party stuff. Oops, back a bit. So this is our basic story. Now we're getting into what do we do for the AI aspects, right? AI, and in particular Copilot, is not doing anything magical to suddenly make your data more available to everybody. Your data is as locked down as it was before you ever heard the word Copilot. Okay, thanks, Ron. What Copilot will do is act as an agent on behalf of the user. So just think of Copilot as a really smart dog. You say, go find me the things. I'm asking you a question in natural language about whatever it is I'm asking you about, and it will find everything relevant that you already have access to. And what we've seen among a lot of customers is they realize, wow, my employees have access to a lot more than they should for various reasons, right? It's not necessarily malicious. It could be in the course of your company's existed, you migrated from file shares to bigger servers, to a data center, to the cloud, and people have just kept the same permissions that they had, and suddenly find out, oh, I've got this access to this folder with a bunch of finance information that I shouldn't have access to, but Copilot will find that information. So what we're seeing is that customers have to take our tools and go through an exercise to say, what is being overshared? Matt will talk a little bit about oversharing in a little bit. And what controls can I put in place to prevent my users from accessing that, and also to prevent Copilot from accidentally surfacing that information. When we look at the regulations and compliance, that's, I mentioned Compliance Manager earlier as a tool where you can say, what are the things I should be doing to be compliant with different regulations, and am I doing that? And we've built in a lot of prompts to say, hey, Regulation X says you should have a data loss prevention policy around this kind of information. Click here to go do that. So if you're an administrator who can do that, you can go create that rule right off the bat. And when we look at the data security posture management tools, similar thing. We've created a console that punches out to data loss prevention, insider risk management, and protection labels. So you can say, I've got one place to look at how wide open is my environment and what do I need to do to start fixing things. So we've made it easier, whereas a year ago, Matt or I would have gotten on call with you and said, you should make some labels, you should make some DLP policies, you should create some insider risk management policies. And now we're talking about 3 different products and maybe talking to a dozen different people on your team. Safeguarding the AI innovation does come back into that Purview United Governance story, but also data security posture management for AI, where you might want your employees to be able to use not just Copilot, but third-party AI tools, whether it's a Claude or a Gemini or whatever it happens to be, going out to not Azure OpenAI, but OpenAI directly. You might be concerned, are people copying and pasting sensitive information into their third-party AI prompts to get an answer back? You might want to have some controls around that. The legs that we've built our data security around are the ones that I keep mentioning. Information protection, which are labels. If you've ever heard of AIP labels and then MIP labels, that's what that is. a label that is metadata on a file that stays with a file no matter where it goes. So even if somebody manages to get that file outside of your environment by copying it to a USB, by emailing it to themselves, by any other methods, they fly to a desert island, they plug it into their personal PC. If there's a label that requires somebody to authenticate as a certain person, they will still be required to authenticate, even if it's outside your environment. Now, before you get to that point, you could put some data loss prevention controls in place that say, don't allow this file, or don't allow a file with this label, or don't allow a file with this content to be emailed outside my organization, or to have a link shared outside my organization, or even inside the organization. You can put some very strict controls on in terms of data loss prevention. And we do this for email, SharePoint, OneDrive. We do this for third-party clouds using Defender for Cloud Apps. We do this for, what did I miss? I think I hit a lot, most of them. Power BI, of all things, has its own data loss prevention policies, capabilities. So we can, using Purview, allow you to put controls on how data in transit is shared. So it can or it can't, whitelisting, blacklisting, all kinds of listing. And then last, we get into this insider risk management, where we start correlating these activities with activities that are outside of M365. So I mentioned a couple of examples earlier that we can say are HR examples. This person turned in their resignation, or this person changed roles maybe. But we can also say, what about a building badging system? What if the triggering event is somebody tried to tap into a bunch of server closets or buildings or rooms that they shouldn't have access to, or that they usually visit once a week and now they're trying to get into multiple times a day? Maybe they lost their badge and somebody found it. Maybe they're just trying to check their card a lot. Who knows? But we can get that signal that may be something completely outside of data security and say, if this is happening, should I take a closer look at what they're doing with the sensitive data that I have in their environment? And with all of these, we've included adaptive protection, which I'm trying to think how I always struggle how to compare this to some of the things that we were doing before. I can say this person is low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And that assessment can come from all kinds of telemetry, not just in Purview, but stuff from Entra. So are they logging in from an unusual location? Are they downloading a lot more content than usual, but still something I would allow to happen? Are they logging in from a managed device or an unmanaged device? Lots of different factors I can choose to say, if this is happening, maybe they're at a medium risk. And if they're medium risk, I might say, I'm going to require you to multi-factor, which you should be doing no matter what. I could say, if you're medium risk, I might say you can only access that content on a managed device. Or I might say, if you're high risk, you can only do that on a managed device on a company network by VPN or on campus, etc. And that scoring, that adaptive risk, might drop if whatever the the signal creating that risk level diminishes. Then maybe you go back to, yeah, I can access this off my phone while I'm waiting for my plane to board, just so I can look at things. But if it goes back up to high risk, I'm stuck with on campus on a managed device. So when we look at Purview data governance, Purview, the United Catalog, this gets into a space that, to be honest, this is where Matt and I usually find somebody who's an expert in these things, but it is part of Purview because we are moving towards a world where both the Purview that we use for data protection, data loss prevention, and so on, will share the same definitions and the same methods of defining sensitive content that we use here. But this is where we're going to say, I've got catalogs of information. It could be any of the things that are on here, right? It could be Databricks. We could look into third-party cloud solutions. And there's going to be some kind of data officer that needs to know what's the quality. Is this good information? Is there stale information? Who owns it? Do I put policies around it? And we can see how these terms are related. So those of you who work in organizations where there's some kind of data officer, not a security person, not even an IT person, but just says there's a library of information that we need to keep track of, this is the tool for you. And it is part of Purview, and it does extend to non-Microsoft clouds. I'm going to click through a little bit faster.
Yeah.
I think they take into too much time.
There's some DSPM for AI.
Yes, let's just go to the good stuff then. These slides will be communicated. You can look at these to your heart's content. A lot of this I think I've kind of covered in depth.
Yeah.
So briefly, yeah, we were right. November 2023, we announced Copilot as being generally available, and boy howdy was it popular. And then last spring, we announced what we called AI Hub. Now we call this DSPM for AI, Data Security Posture Management for AI. And it does all the things right there. And I'll show you a few slides since you click through these things. This is what it is. Yeah. So this is what DSPM for AI looks like. It is part of Purview. Hopefully this is good resolution for everybody. But it is your one-stop shop to see where is the sensitive information in my environment? What alerts am I getting? Is there any unlabeled content, right? If you're considering or in the middle of a Copilot rollout, you might want to see, where do I have unlabeled files? Because an unlabeled file has no control on it other than maybe it lives in a SharePoint site that only 3 people can access. But if it goes anywhere else, it's going to be accessible. We can get some reports, including interactions with Copilot, which can be a good correlation with Copilot adoption if you're trying to track that as a metric for success for your Copilot rollout. And what about with enterprise apps? Not just Copilot, but it could be Azure OpenAI, it could be any of the other things that I mentioned. And we can get, how many times are people going out and visiting third-party AI solutions? We can get some nice metrics that our lovely product team has put together, a 38,000 and change top unethical use in AI interactions. So that could be all kinds of things like, hey, what are some great ways to insult my coworkers? And probably some darker things that I'm not going to try and speculate on. And also, what kind of apps are interacting with sensitive information? So we've got examples for Gemini and OpenAI from ChatGPT and Claude are being used, not just the Microsoft Cloud. Point is, this is your one-stop shop to say what is going on in terms of AI usage in my environment, hence the term DSPM for AI, because we do have a data security posture management for everything else. What kind of prompts are people putting into them? We just categorize them. So we have things like, they put some risky prompts, or maybe Copilot brought back some sensitive information to them. So in a lot of ways, this is security person's worst nightmare, but it's also visibility. So it's a dream because now you can at least see, what's going on. Now, Activity Explorer is something that we normally talk about in a Purview or Purview DLP. I think somebody has a phone going. It's not here. Yeah. Okay. And as you can see, AI interaction is one kind of activity that occurs. So you could filter just on that. You could filter on AI interactions by this person or these people or this location and just see what they're doing.
All right, I can try.
All right. You can also see, what's the prompt that they put in? Hey, tell me about Project Obsidian M&A. Just a Word document. And it'll show me what did Copilot come back with. I'm looking in the Activity Explorer. I saw there was an interaction with AI. I can click on the blade to see what was that interaction. And they just said, hey, Copilot, tell me about this file. And it will tell me what Copilot sent back to them. Okay. I think interest of time, we'll turn over to Matt for some data sharing and oversharing and more.
Got it. Let me do one thing. This is Ron Gerber, just interrupting here. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. All right, things are moving on. I'm glad Dan, my neighbor in Roslyn, is doing well. If a couple of people in the chat, if you could simply point out, want to make sure the audio is good and visual as we're switching over here. And we'll continue to ask questions. I know Michael's got one down there in Tennessee in a little bit, but if you could make sure that it's good. All right, thanks, Vikas. All right, let's turn over to Matt now.
Stay on that.
Yeah, got it. And we've got the mic here for you.
Okay.
You can just exit out.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so yeah, you have a question?
I'm sorry, Parker, you mentioned malicious discussion on emails. among employees. Does the AI able to screen that? The reason is there was some litigation,
Mhm.
you know, and they were looking at emails and then still commenting malicious comments about somebody else.
Mhm.
Are you telling me that your current platform can do that?
So
Summarize.
yeah, so I'll summarize the thank you for the reminder. So the question is, can we use Purview or any of the tools in Purview to look at employee conversations by email, by Teams about some kind of collusion on being mean or being malicious in some way? Does that sound like a fair summary?
Right.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So one, even before we get to where we're talking about Copilot or AI, communication compliance is a solution in Purview that falls in a category called supervision. So I usually talk about this in like a regulatory environment where we don't want broker dealers colluding or trading information, but it can also be for what are people emailing or in Teams chats one-on-one or meetings, conversations saying to one another. We have these things called trainable classifiers, which are a machine learning model, but they're not AI. And we do have trainable classifiers for things like threatening language, harassment. We also have visual ones like sending whatever, not suitable for work images in Teams or emails. So that is a tool we can use to see that kind of back and forth. What I was mentioning for Copilot is that we can we basically just treat Copilot as another participant in that conversation. So now if, somebody uses Copilot to, look up dirty jokes, we can see, yes, that's what they told Copilot to do, and Copilot came back with that. So we can do it for humans and also human AI interactions.
But you just said basically it's trainable.
Yeah, trainable classify. Yeah, so you can create your own. We have several out of box, and they do learn over time, right? Because things like foul language evolves over time. Certain other things. It's always a fun one to demo. Yeah, we'll take more at the end. Yeah, okay, good.
Can we just save that question so we get to the end?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to try to get through the next section in about 10 minutes. I know Jay is going next, so we'll try to keep things on track. But what Julie just showed about DSPM for AI, so far it's kind of been looking back at what had happened. So someone interacted with Copilot, sent this prompt, got this response. So trying to see how users are actually interacting with the Copilot is one thing, but we also hear from customers that they're afraid to get started in the first place because they have this oversharing problem. They don't know what people have access to, and it's scary to just get started. So data oversharing is one of the top concerns that's acting as a roadblock for any Copilot or generative AI usage. He exit the, oh, sorry, that's his screen going. Oh, sorry. That's right. So, and what are the problems, right? So it's access to information beyond what the user should have, right? Because it's data that has been moved around. There's no control over it. And as Julie pointed out, Copilot is going to act on behalf of that user. So if I have access to 1 million files and I prompt Copilot, it's going to look at those 1 million files to see, hey, what's the most relevant response that I could give Matt in this scenario? So thinking about that, data oversharing and kind of just overshared content in general becomes an AI problem, but it's been a problem that's been around for a while. And now it's just kind of bubbling up to the surface because it's being pointed out as this glaring issue and now getting in the way of Copilot adoption and deployment. So, and it makes sense because there's a lot of ways where files could just be left open. I mean, just look at SharePoint. You could share links saying anyone with this link can access. Your default sharing option could be everyone. You could change permissions on files or sites that kind of break the way that it was supposed to be set up because you changed the permissions on a folder. Now everything else is open. So just thinking about all the different ways that files can be shared, even just in the SharePoint realm, I mean, these are 5 examples right there. So there's this problem and people are wondering, well, how can I wrap my arms around this and not fall behind because I want to use Copilot or I want to use generative AI. So building off of DSPM for AI, last month, we announced some new features and capabilities within this solution. The 2 that I'm going to walk through are oversharing assessments and then DLP for Copilot. And then we'll wrap up with just pointing out some blueprints that we have that are public, they're available to you. So you can look at those after this session and basically follow it like a step-by-step guide to get ready for Copilot deployment or really any generative AI adoption. So the main announcements from Ignite related to Copilot and Purview are just the new enhancements to DSPM for AI. So we had DSPM for AI, which was AI Hub. Then we added in data assessments for this solution, enabled DLP for Copilot. So basically acting like another user here, you can block Copilot from accessing information, which is a key feature here. And then we have a blueprint that you can reference to follow and figure out how you want to, deploy Copilot or any other generative AI apps. So I'll walk you through this. And again, we're just going to use some screenshots, but first one we're going to go through is data assessments. So within the Purview portal, right, DSPM for AI, there's this new section at the bottom left called data assessments. And what it can do is understand what a user has access to. So if you include them in an assessment, it can say, okay, Matt has access to these 100 SharePoint sites. Here's what's in them. Here's what's sensitive. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to take action? Do you want to block some of this information off from Copilot? Do you want to apply a label to it to kind of take more control back and control who has access to that information? But the data assessments first give you that view, that kind of blast radius of what an employee has access to. Because remember, Copilot can act on behalf of the user. We need to first understand what that user has access to. So running an assessment, it's a pretty quick process. You click Create Assessment, describe the name of the assessment, choose who you want to run the assessment over. So maybe there's, you have 100 Copilot licenses, you're trying to deploy them, you have 100 employees that want to sign up for the pilot. So you could give those licenses to those 100 employees, but first let's run an assessment over what these employees have access to. So you would select them in this process, choose the locations. For now, it's going to be OneDrive and SharePoint, and then run it. When you get the results, you'll see that they're at the bottom there, all the sites that they have access to, as well as some key information about what's inside of those sites, such as what's sensitive, what has been accessed lately, what's been scanned and what cannot be scanned. You'll also see on the top right that there are data, the sharing links breakdown. So how is this data really being shared overall based off of what we can see? Some are just shared with the organization entirely. Some are specific people, some are external. So there's key information in here about how this data is open to other people. And then from there, we can take control and kind of bring that back in so that we feel comfortable deploying Copilot for these users. Clicking on one of those sites, if you want to dig in and see more specifically, what are these files? We can see a bunch of Word documents here, some that are not labeled. They don't have a sensitivity label, but they do have sensitive information in them. You can see the owner, the user risk level, going back to insider risk. We can see that there's some risky users perhaps. And then also in the far right, the last column, how that information was shared, what sharing links are being used. So this is kind of, again, bringing back control to the admin and allowing, giving you the tools to lock down some information or restrict access to it, seeing it from this kind of point of view. So if we wanted to take some action on a particular site, you have two main options, right? One is restrict access by label. This would be done through a sensitivity label. The other option is to restrict all items in the site. And we want to get away from that because if you lock down the whole site, then you also lock down all that information from Copilot. And then, how much is that really helping your organization or your employee if you're just blocking all that information? So we want to focus more on the sensitive information. So that's where a label comes in. And if you wanted to go through that process, it'll tell you right there, steps at a glance, go to DLP in the Microsoft Purview portal, create a policy, choose the policy, select the label. So I'll keep going through this, but if you did not have any sensitivity labels deployed in your environment, there's also this option as well. You could create a default sensitivity label, so general or confidential, but you could also use an auto labeling policy to go after those specific items that contain sensitive information, label them as confidential, then tell Copilot you can't access anything that's confidential. And as I mentioned before, the other option could be to restrict an entire site if you knew up front saying, hey, everything in here is confidential, or this is just for the HR department, but I'm trying to give a Copilot license to the finance department. So, I'm just going to lock down this site. Your other option is just to monitor, right? You can monitor how this site develops, or also delegate some of this cleanup to other people. So you could start a SharePoint site access review. You could run a Microsoft Entra ID user access review. So we're pointing you to the other solutions that can help kind of patch this all up, this kind of ignored problem that's been out there, so that you can conquer it by labels, by DLP, site access reviews in SharePoint, or even Entra ID. So if you want to lock it down from the identity level as well. I mentioned this already, but so DLP for Copilot, let's go back to this example where you're restricting access by a label. The way that you would set this up is to go into DLP, create a new policy, and it's basically the same step as you would any other DLP policy, except that now in locations we have Copilot 360 or Microsoft 365 Copilot as a selectable option as a location. So this DLP policy is going to apply to Copilot, and we're going to tell it not to process any content that contains the sensitivity label Obsidian merger. Maybe it's a M&A project. You don't want Copilot to be able to access any of this information. Label those documents. Tell Copilot you can't look at these documents when users are prompting Copilot for information. Right. So the key announcements from Ignite as they pertain to DLP is that Copilot is now a location. And that second, the action at the bottom left is that you can prevent Copilot from processing content. So in an example for an end user, if they were to say summarize Project Obsidian, it can reference, it can kind of summarize that it can see the document, but it can't give anything else about it. It says, unfortunately, I can't provide more detailed information as the content is protected. So while the user may have access to that file, and that's okay, Copilot does not have that level of access. So now we're starting to break that off a little bit so that Copilot can, we can limit much more what Copilot can access, but the user can still do their day-to-day activities. Okay, last but not least, I think I have a couple of minutes. We promised a blueprint to address oversharing. So we talked about the solutions that were announced, but what does it actually look like putting it all together? So a lot of the announcements at Ignite were about gaining visibility into what people are doing, right? So that is key to understanding how Copilot deployment is going, or how generative AI is being used in your organization. And Purview's focus is really on sensitive data. So understanding how sensitive data is being accessed, potentially leaked, potentially overshared. These are key points that we need to focus on and weave into our strategy when we think about deployment. So here's what a potential blueprint could look like. And the key things that I want to point out here is really the bottom row, how long this could actually take. Because people consider deployment of Copilot something that could take a really long time. They have this oversharing problem. It's going to take months or years to clean up. But you could just start out with a small subset of users. Remember that with that oversharing assessment, you can run it over specific people, see what they have access to. Once you clean that up, you can give them a license. So you just keep chipping away at that, and basically you can end up at a full deployment at a larger scale. But piloting and running that assessment, cleaning up those sites, that could take one business week, 2 to 4 days. And then as you keep chipping away, adding more licenses or deploying it at a larger scale, you just keep an eye on the tools that we already talked about. DSPM for AI can monitor how people are prompting Copilot or other generative AI apps, the responses that they're getting back. And this is a constant effort that you can keep going back to and cleaning up. You can create DLP policies, extend what it's covering, do more labels, right? It's a continuous process, but the way to get started is really just to get started, right? You have to see it, how it's going to work. And that oversharing assessment, our hope is that that can get you over that first initial hurdle, and then you can monitor how it's going and gain more confidence in the whole deployment process as a whole. Here, I'm not going to drain this because it's really just this in more detail, based off of what exactly you could consider doing. These are some recommendations. So again, identify the most important sites, grant access to low-risk sites for Copilot, turn on monitoring and auditing. Right, that's like step one, piloting on the left side. There's an even more in-depth slide, depending on what licenses you have. So some premium features that we have here in E5, it's the same blueprint overall, but just some more detailed steps. So this will be available to you so you can take a look at this. There's a link at the bottom if you want to follow the official page on Microsoft Learn pages, where it has even more links if you want to go down rabbit holes and see all the specific details down to the toggles and portals you need to go to turn these things on and follow these steps. So this is the last slide. Just call to action. We have a bunch of links from Ignite, so please just take a look whenever you have the time to. The top one there, turn on data loss prevention analytics. That'll be my last plug. This is a new thing that we launched as well. If you have data loss prevention, if you're familiar with it in Purview, all you have to do is go to settings and turn on data loss prevention analytics, and it'll start looking at what people are doing. It's not going to create any policies. It's not going to interfere with anything. It's really just looking at what people are doing. And this is all about gaining visibility. That's really where Purview is trying to be like the leader of that, right? Try to give you visibility so that you can take action. So first, you got to see what's going on. So I'd recommend turning on data loss prevention analytics because it's there. It takes 3 clicks just to toggle. Then you start seeing recommendations and insights. And then the rest of these links are all about the specific Ignite announcements to specific products like IRM, ESPM, VLP. I know we use a lot of acronyms, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. So that is good for our session.